So this morning, we've been reminded that food is medicine when it comes from healthy living systems. And this afternoon, we're diving into the industrial bioeconomy, turning biomass into energy, materials, and products that will power tomorrow's economy. My aim here is to show you that both of these futures rest on the exact same foundation, one that too often gets treated as mere dirt. My core message today is this: that food is medicine only when soil is infrastructure. But soil is only effective as infrastructure if the system beneath it is functioning. And that system is not abstract. It's physical, it's biological, it's substrate. So today's conversation about food, health, energy, and materials are all expressions of a deeper question. Are we investing in abstractions? And by abstractions, I mean metrics, incentives, narratives, credits, or in the biological system that actually carries value through time. So what does that actually look like, substrate, across these domains? And I'm not using that as a metaphor. It's the physical systems that actually do the work beneath our economies and our institutions. Those are healthy soils, carbon and nutrient cycling, water dynamics, remembering that water follows carbon, and biological communities that determine whether nutrients are accessible, whether crops are resilient, and whether landscapes absorb shock or amplify it. Just as a pipeline is infrastructure because it moves energy, soil is infrastructure because it captures, processes, and moves atoms. And when the pipeline breaks, the economy fails. When the soil substrate breaks, the bioeconomy that we're talking about here today doesn't really have a floor to stand on. These systems operate quietly, and they don't show up cleanly on balance sheets. And for a long time, we treated them as background conditions rather than as primary assets. So whether we're talking about food and health or materials and energy, we're really asking the same question. Are we investing in things that generate outcomes or in proxies for those outcomes? In many parts of our economy, we become very effective at creating abstractions, metrics, incentives, credits, and narratives that stand in for function. Those abstractions, we've learned, can move capital quickly and sometimes quite usefully. But here's the distinction that matters. Abstraction produces value only while external supports, like incentives, narratives, policy, is maintained. Substrate investment builds capacity that allows value to compound and endure. One depends on continuity, the other actually builds it. And that difference shows up everywhere. Agriculture and food systems are the front door because food is where biological systems meet daily life, household economics, and human health. It shows up in whether food heals or merely fills, in whether landscapes absorb water or shed it catastrophically, and in whether supply chains are resilient or brittle, and ultimately in whether communities and markets can adapt to the transitions we all know are coming. And we're now seeing this more clearly. These biological systems don't stop at the farm gate. The soil biome, the gut biome, and the brain-gut axis are part of a continuous living system, with food acting as a primary messenger between landscapes and human health. So this isn't theoretical anymore. It's being measured, observed, and replicated in the field. And what we're really describing here is a biogeochemical system where biology, geology, and chemistry interact continuously to determine whether land stores carbon, holds water, cycles nutrients, and supports life. Those same relationships that govern soil function also shape food quality, human metabolism, and resilience all the way down to the cellular level. So this is not an argument, it's a lens across these domains of health, soils and agriculture, energy and materials. There are people, projects, and systems working at the level of substrate, and others working at the level of abstraction. Both matter and both have value, but they do behave differently over time. This is one underlying structure expressing itself in different domains, and that distinction is what ties this work together. And it leads to a very simple way of seeing it. Most of what we call pollution is simply atoms out of place. It shows up like this: carbon in the atmosphere instead of the soil, nutrients moving through waterways instead of held in root zones, and organic material diverted to landfills or burn piles instead of cycling through living systems. So think of it in this way: if soil is the pipeline, then every atom out of place is a leak or a blockage in that system. We don't need to just reduce harm, we need to repair the pipeline, returning those atoms to systems that can hold and cycle them. Right place, right system. And when that happens, capacity begins to build again. And we're now seeing that in practice, observed across multiple landscapes, including large-scale rangeland trials. When carbon organic material is returned to soil, we find that carbon holds, water retention increases, and biological activity expands. And this is not abstract, it's just physical. And one of the clearest places this becomes visible is in how soil systems respond. Soil is not an input, it is infrastructure. It governs. It governs how water moves, how nutrients cycle, and how biological systems operate. When that infrastructure is functioning, it builds capacity, storing carbon, retaining water, and supporting the microbial systems that make all life possible. And this reframes what we're actually looking at. Seen this way, the problem shifts. What we've been calling waste, organic materials, nutrients, carbon, and nutrients running through them, are moving through the wrong systems. It's no longer waste, though. It's misallocation of atoms, of materials, and of biology. So that reframing, what we've called waste, we now understand to be a valuable resource. It opens a different set of possibilities across these domains of food and health and bio-based materials and energy. What is being shaped is the intelligent placement of atoms and microbes, because even low-value atoms in market terms are extraordinarily high value biologically. They feed soils, they rebuild structure, they restore microbial communities that make nutrients accessible and water usable. High-value atoms, on the other hand, those destined for fuels, materials, bioproducts, and other energy, depend on those same biological systems upstream. This is not an either-or proposition, it's a question of order. It is a problem of sequencing, of cycling systems. One of the most underappreciated opportunities is what I often refer to as a microbial arbitrage, or leveraging the biology in our system to rapidly rebuild system capacity. And we're beginning to understand how soil microbial communities respond when given the right carbon, nutrients, and moisture, and how quickly soils can shift state from degraded to functional when biology is reintroduced and sustained. So this is not a theory, it's just an observed response, and it points to something very important. Our low CapEx near-term strategies, such as composting, soil amendments, and organic matter management, can be deployed immediately to return organic material to living systems, while larger bioindustrial systems require years of development, permitting, and capital formation, coming online over a longer timeline. And it's the same underlying infrastructure that determines whether food can heal and whether industrial systems can be sustained long-term. This is not a compromise, it's just an optimization. Start where the biology responds. And what's emerging now is the ability to actually execute at that level, not just pilots, but coordinated systems where material flows, processing infrastructure, and land application are truly aligned. And this is where low-cost, near-term interventions already proven at scale can be deployed immediately, while larger bioindustrial systems for fuels, materials, and energy get built over time without breaking the biological system beneath them. This is not a technology gap, it's an implementation challenge, and increasingly an alignment challenge. And both are now solvable. And when those elements begin to align, visibility, policy, execution, what emerges is not a collection of projects, it's an operating system. a way of coordinating material, biology, infrastructure, and capital across landscapes and over time, not optimizing for isolated outcomes, but for system function. And when that structure begins to function, capacity builds, coordination improves, and the need for intervention long-term begins to decline. What has changed is not our understanding, but our margin for delay. We now know enough about soil response, microbial dynamics, carbon cycling, and water behavior to act with confidence. Continued misallocation is no longer accidental, it is structural. And once a system becomes structural, the question is no longer what is possible, but whether it's aligned. At this point, allowing organic material to be wasted is not a failure of technology or capital, it becomes a failure of coordination. And importantly, the system itself is beginning to respond. In California, legislation has already established organics diversion away from landfills at scale, creating both obligation and opportunity to redirect material. More recent legislation expands what's possible, increasing permit-exempt thresholds for community scale and on-farm composting, which means more material can be processed locally, more quickly, and closer to the land that needs it. The constraints are beginning to loosen, and when visibility, policy, and biology begin to align, coordination begins to move from theory into practice. And it is something we can choose. And why that choice really matters is because water follows carbon. When carbon leaves the soil, water leaves with it. And when carbon returns, the water returns. And once the water's back, biological systems begin to function again. Volatility is reduced, extremes are buffered. Yields and ecosystems stabilize together. This is true for farms, it's true for watersheds, and it's true for communities, because they are all expressions of the same system, which is why soil is not just an agronomic concern. It is earth crust infrastructure that supports human health, food systems, biodiversity above and below ground, local economies, and ultimately industrial resilience. Over time, something else begins to happen. As soils are restored and biological capacity increases, the systems begin to converge. That living infrastructure beneath us, the soils, biology, and water, begins to do more of the work. Different uses, from soil restoration to fuels, materials, and bioproducts, are no longer in tension. They begin to align together around highest and best use, not just in market terms, but in system terms. The bioindustrial system requires consistent, sustainable feedstocks. The land that sustains those feedstocks requires carbon, nutrients, and biological activity. So the same atoms that can serve both living systems and industrial systems if they are cycled intelligently without overdrawing the living system that sustains them. And this isn't a scarcity problem. The earth is continually bathed in energy. The question is whether we capture and cycle it or allow it to dissipate and be lost. It is a coordination problem, and coordination begins with visibility, with seeing where materials are, how they move, and where they're lost. And that visibility is no longer theoretical. We now have the ability to map organic material flows across regions, counties, and landscapes to see where biomass is generated, where it's underutilized, and where it's just lost. We don't just guess where the infrastructure is broken, where the atoms are leaking out. We map it. In California alone, this is tens of millions of tons each year, organic material that can become either a liability or substrate. These include agricultural and forestry residues, food waste, and municipal organic streams. These materials already exist in large quantities, but they are distributed, fragmented, and often misvalued, treated as liabilities rather than assets. And once you can see it through mapping, it changes how decisions are made across science, industry, finance, and policy. Working with the ATIP Foundation, we have geospatially mapped California's organic material flows, creating a digital twin of the state's biological structure. Although these are done in California as a proof of concept because the data there is quite granular, the logic is universal, and every major ag region, especially here in Texas, has the same untapped biomass streams and the same massive coordination opportunity. Here's the biomass, tree nuts and orchards, millions of tons of potential substrate annually, currently treated as waste, as a liability. In California's Central Valley, these aren't just dispersed trees, they're industrial nodes. Through mapping, we identify where the biomass is being generated and sometimes aggregated. When we layer in CAFO, or the manures from concentrated animal feeding operations, we aren't just looking at a pollution problem, we're looking at a nutrient loading opportunity for the substrate. Orchards provide us with high carbon feedstock, and when we layer it with manure and food waste locations, we aren't just looking at a map of farms, we're looking at the inventory of the bioeconomy. This is the substrate waiting to be coordinated. Then we can visualize where repair can occur through existing composting operations, or where that biomass can land at existing bioindustrial facilities to catch the leakage. Making these feedstocks legible empowers stakeholders and enables coordinated planning for their use. We can direct them to place, planned and sequenced to provide the greatest benefit. Some of the atoms returning to the soil to maintain capacity, and some moving to other parts of the bioeconomy, provided the substrate itself is not being drawn down. And when soil infrastructure is restored, when substrate is rebuilt and continually maintained, atoms stop being scarce in the ways that matter most within a functioning system. When systems are regenerative, those atoms continue to circulate. And when the systems become generative long-term, those same atoms can support soils, food, ecosystems, and bioindustrial production simultaneously. This is the difference between scarcity management and capacity creation. Cycling materials intelligently, restoring capacity first, sustaining it next, and allowing systems to generate more than they consume over time. And this is why this moment matters. There is no need to wait for perfect policy, and no need to wait for every facility to get built, and no need to wait for the next incentive cycle. The materials already exist. Organic matter is already being generated and too often misallocated. The opportunity is to put it to work, to restore first, to sustain next, and then to move vitality forward, because once substrate is rebuilt, our optionalities increase for land, for communities, for capital, and for the ecosystems. This is not building a single better system, it's about reestablishing the conditions that allow many better systems to emerge across food, health, energy, materials, and biodiversity, all grounded in the same living foundation. As those conditions are restored, the bioeconomy is no longer remote or opaque. It becomes visible, place-based, and legible, a system that transforms food, waste, and biology into health, jobs, resilient communities, and the materials that support them. That is the bridge. From here, the system can be entered through many doors. One of the most immediate and most human is health. Food is where these dynamics become most visible and most personal, where soil, water, biology, culture, and care meet the human body. It is where systems become lived experience. And seen this way, health is not downstream. It is an expression of what is happening upstream, in soils, in the landscapes, and in the systems that connect them all. The next layer of the work follows that connection, from substrate to human outcome, from soil to food to health, and expanding outward into energy, materials, and the broader bioeconomy, moving from understanding soil as a background to treating it as our primary infrastructure. And there are multiple pathways now emerging for entering and participating in that system. These pathways are becoming visible because the system itself is coming into view. And once you see it, you begin to see your place within it. Soil is infrastructure, and this circular bioeconomy only comes alive when we coordinate the pieces. If you're working on any part of this, mapping feedstocks, restoring soil, developing bio-based products, shaping policy, or deploying capital, please scan the QR code or email me directly. People, Food, and Land Foundation, we see it as our job to align these living systems and scale them across regions. Let's build this foundation together. Thank you.